The inverted coaster was introduced to the theme park industry in 1992 with Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great America. Bolliger and Mabillard envisioned a roller coaster that could go upside down and have trains underneath the track. Putting trains under the track in general wasn't exactly a new concept. Aerodynamics had installed the world's first suspended coaster with the Bat at Kings Island, not to be confused with the Bat that operates at the park today. This design would be tamer than the future inverted coasters, but would allow the trains to rock side by side as an added thrill. However, these rides would not be capable of traversing inversions, which is why Batman the Ride was such a big deal. Bolliger and Mabillard have had, in my opinion, the most successful inverted coaster model on the market. Technically, Vekoma have built more SLCs around the world, but that's because parks that couldn't afford a B&M invert had no other choice. So far, there have been 32 B&M inverts built around the world, 33 if you count both sides of Dragon Challenge, and only 2 have ceased operation, both for issues unrelated to the rides themselves. Now, it's worth noting that 12 of these rides are identical to one another and are categorized as Batman the Ride clones. I technically haven't ridden all of these, but of the 6 I have done, they feel almost exactly the same. Sure, some run a bit faster than others and some have different settings, but the differences aren't enough to shift its ranking. For simplicity, I'll be cramming all of these Batman clones into one spot on this list. That leaves 19 potential entries onto this list, except wait, I haven't ridden any B&M inverts outside of the country except for one. That one coaster is Black Mamba at Phantasialand, which I was originally going to leave out altogether, but I'll give it an honorable mention once we get to where it would rank. Now we're left with 11 coasters, except wait, another issue, I haven't ridden every B&M invert in America either. I'm actually missing one ride, Flight Deck, at California's Great America, which was closed during my one and only visit to the park in 2021. However, I think I have a pretty good idea of where that would place, so I'll be featuring it anyways. Just take the ranking with a bit of a grain of salt. Alright, you got all that? I know it was a lot, but bear with me here, this is every B&M invert in America, ranked from worst to best. Kicking things off at number 11 is Silver Bullet at Knott's Berry Farm. For being my least favorite B&M inverted coaster, this is still a good fun ride. I know I've been dismissive about Silver Bullet in the past, but the ride has grown on me, I think. It is impressive what Knott's Berry Farm managed to fit despite the fact that it's a landlocked park. Though its first drop is more of a ramp than a drop, everything that follows is very enjoyable. You've got a forceful vertical loop, a unique overbank turn, 2 great corkscrews, and a gray-out-inducing double helix over the water. I think the Cobra Roll and Zero G Roll could afford to be taken with more speed, but I can forgive that for everything else the ride offers. Number 10, Talon at Dorney Park. Something worth noting is a lot of these B&M inverts feel very similar to one another in the same way RMCs can be. Yet there's always something about each of these where they excel. It's for that reason that ranking these proved to be real difficult, and the reason I mention this now is because I love every ride from this point on. Talon is arguably Dorney Park's best coaster, and it's only number 10 on this list. Not only does it have my favorite color scheme on any roller coaster out there, but its layout is quite solid as well. A fantastic first drop in the back row, 4 forceful inversions, and distinctively different halves. The first half is similar to most other B&M inverts with the vertical loop, Zero G Roll, and Immelman, but after the turnaround section, Talon plunges into a low to the ground portion with some sleek transitions and forceful valleys. Overall, I wouldn't call Talon a very intense B&M invert, but this portion clearly has some bite to it and it rounds out a relatively diverse layout for a ride like this. Number 9, Patriot at Worlds of Fun. This and Talon are very much sister coasters. If you've ridden both, you'll notice that they ride more similarly than any of the other original B&M inverts. Why, I don't know. Patriot opened in 2006 and Talon opened 5 years prior in 2001. Both of these are among the least intense B&M inverts, but are glossy smooth and filled to the brim with fun elements. Patriot has a similar start to Talon with a twisting first drop, vertical loop, Zero G Roll, and Immelman, but that's where things change a bit, with a little less emphasis on staying low to the ground, but a surprising few pops of airtime on an inverted coaster. This caught me quite off guard my first ride, which barely pushed Patriot over Talon on my list. Number 8, Flight Deck at California's Great America. As I mentioned, Flight Deck is the only ride on this list I have not ridden, but I'm almost sure it would rank right here on my list. Forgive me if this actually does end up a spot too low, because it seems very comparable to the next runner-up. Flight Deck opened in 1993, making it one of the earliest B&M inverts, and if you've ridden some of the manufacturer's earlier rides, you know that they don't quite build them like they used to. Back when they were just getting started, they were building coasters far more intense than they do nowadays. Though I can't exactly speak from experience, I've heard Flight Deck is a perfect example of one of these old school B&Ms. It's definitely a really short ride at only 2,200 feet long, hence why it isn't higher on this list, but if you look at its elements, it's a fun time. It's got some fan favorite moments you can expect from a B&M invert, with some intense helixes separating the inversions and even a low to the ground finale over the water. Sometime this fall, I hope to make my way back to this park, but for now, this is where Flight Deck is going to land. Number 7, Batman the Ride clones. I mentioned earlier that there are 12 of these Batman clones located around the world, and I've loved all 6 I've ridden so far. These include Batman the Ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain, Six Flags Great Adventure, Six Flags St. Louis, and Six Flags Over Georgia, as well as Goliath at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, and Great White at SeaWorld San Antonio. If you've ridden any of the others, this is where they'd place on the list. Now, why have these rides been so popular? Well, simply put, it's amazing just how many forceful elements they managed to cram in a 2,700 feet of track. Though Batman clones only stand 100 feet tall, they pack in 5 different inversions, including 2 vertical vertical loops, 2 corkscrews, and a 0G roll. Each of these are among the best inversions you can find on this ride model. This isn't to mention the fact that each of these remain very smooth rides. Matter of fact, every B&M invert I've done, except for one, are perfectly smooth, which is commendable for a model dating back to 1992. Number 6, Great Bear at Hershey Park. This one takes the cake as the most unusual B&M invert I've done so far. The order of all these elements are in such a peculiar order, which had to be the case because B&M had a very limited amount of land to work with in this section of Hershey Park. For starters, once you crest the lift hill, there's a helix way up in the air acting as a whole pre-drop section. Then, after the vertical loop, implement, and 0G roll, the ride has to narrowly avoid track and supports from other coasters in the area and especially Super Duper Looper. That's why you have this weird straight track towards the end, which I actually quite enjoy because it showcases the ride's sense of speed quite well. In many instances, a limited amount of space can be the cause for a rather lackluster coaster, but Great Bear's sprawling layout utilizing compact elements make for exactly the opposite. Number 5, Raptor at Cedar Point. Perhaps the most iconic B&M invert out there cracks the top 5 on my list. I haven't ridden this coaster since 2019 during my first visit to Cedar Point, but having gotten plenty of rides on it, I concluded that it was one of the best rides of its kind at the time. Though I haven't been able to follow up with any re-rides since, I'll make the educated guess that Raptor is still kicking ass these days. For a ride built in 1994, this thing is wild. It has a unique twist and straight drop for a B&M invert before some classic elements, including one of my favorite Cobra rolls and some of my favorite corkscrews on one of these rides. Now, if there is a downside, Raptor is one of the only rides on this list with a mid-course brake run. But I was actually lucky enough to ride this coaster when the mid-course was only slightly hitting, meaning the second half was really intense. It's worth noting though that over in France, you can experience Raptor without trim brakes on a ride called Monster at Walligator Park. This is something I'd love to ride at some point because I can imagine the second half to be on par with Raptor's spectacular first half. Number 4, Banshee at Kings Island. The last B&M invert that was introduced to the US was Banshee, which opened in 2014 as the longest inverted coaster in the world. Where most B&M inverts aren't very tall and focus on compact elements, Banshee does something very different, and I think they executed it quite well. At 167 feet tall, nearly 70 miles per hour, and over 4,100 feet of length, Banshee is an absolute beast. All of its elements are more spread out than the other rides on this list, but because the thing is so huge, it manages to make all these elements feel very intense. Matter of fact, I think there's an argument to be made that Banshee is the most forceful B&M invert on this list. Because it's a bit of a terrain coaster, Banshee keeps a great sense of speed except for the moments where it intentionally goes slow, such as the last Heartline roll, which was a very cool element. The one issue I have with this ride is it's by far the shakiest coaster on this list. Now, is it unbearable? Absolutely not. But is it pleasant? Not really. For me, it doesn't take away much from the ride experience, but it's just weird that it's shaky to begin with since it opened in 2014. That said, this is still a terrific coaster, and I completely understand if it's any of your guys' favorite B&M invert. Number 3, Afterburn at Carowinds. You don't hear loads of people talk about this one, but when they do, it's only positive. This got me really hyped to ride it in 2021, and let me just say, Afterburn did not disappoint even a little. This coaster has elements prevalent on my favorite B&M invert, with a pretty unique highlight moment being the Batwing diving underground. This is a super whippy element, and I absolutely loved it. From what I can remember, there's exactly one part of the ride that loses steam, and that's the hill over the station, but it's understandable why they had to position it that way. Literally everything else about Afterburn is a hit, and holy crap, for a ride that opened in 1999, it is a remarkably smooth coaster. Now, up next is where Black Mamba at Phantasialand would be if it were located in America. This is a theme park located in rural Germany that features one of the only B&Ms I rode on my big Europe trip last year. The park is most well known for its remarkable themed areas with rides and roller coasters flying all around the lands. Black Mamba can be found in Phantasialand's Africa section, and it is truly unbelievable what B&M managed to fit here. Black Mamba only stands 85 feet tall, and nearly all of it is situated beneath ground level. The compact nature of all these elements calls for some really intense moments and fantastic near-miss elements, especially if you're sitting in the front row. Someone can fact check me on this, but it really feels like Phantasialand built the African section of the park around Black Mamba's layout. That's the difference with, say, Great Bear, which was built around Hershey Park's hollow section, and that's why the layout's so strange. I believe it's the culprit why the layout, in addition to the theming, is so outstanding on this ride. Black Mamba may be the one outlier from Europe on this list, but if you ever get the chance to ride it, I think it could end up being some of your guys' favorite B&M invert. Number 2, Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Part of me wants to put this ride at 1 so bad, but here's the thing about Alpengeist. The ride is divided into 2 halves, each separated by a mid-course brake run. Because the ride is so massive with so much speed, the mid-course brake run has to forcefully and abruptly trim riders, causing the second half to be lackluster compared to other B&M inverts. However, when looking at the longer first half, it is by far my favorite portion of any one of these rides I've ever ridden. Alpengeist is the tallest full-circuit inverted coaster in the world at 195 feet tall. Despite the fact that it's so large, it was built in 1997, back when B&M were still building ultra-intense coasters. The 170-foot first drop is so huge that it literally wraps underneath the lift hill before flying into the first of Alpengeist's many forceful inversions. An Immelmann then leads into a vertical loop, which leads into the most intense Cobra roll on any coaster I've ever ridden. The whip here is just ridiculous, and it's amazing that they profiled it to be this whippy wimpy despite how much speed you've got. Alpengeist is an astounding coaster, but because it isn't consistent the whole way through, I decided to give the top spot to number 1, Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. This is unanimously considered the best B&M invert in the country, and I can understand why. It has a similar layout to that of Afterburn with a major bonus. Montu is almost 50 feet taller, yet still, it has underground tunnels and trenches amplifying the speed and whip on some of these elements. The first few elements aren't inherently unique to this ride, but still the gold standard for a B&M invert before it switches up. Montu then flies into a Batwing, which is by far one of the greatest inversions ever built. Imagine Afterburn's Batwing with nearly twice as much whip. It then has a mid-course brake run, which might be the only thing Afterburn has on this ride, but it's okay because it quickly picks up the pace with more elements built partially beneath ground level, including a second vertical loop and a ridiculously whippy corkscrew to end out the ride. I do believe there could be better B&M inverts outside of the US, but as of now, Montu reigns supreme as my favorite one of these I've ever ridden. But how does your list differ? I'd love to hear all about it in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and give this video a like, and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content like this in the future. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.